60 to 65, that range. My wife would love it. But he's done his best. That's right. It's been 2 weeks since we studied about the life of Christ. We're going to continue this series, conclude it through the end of May. And right now we are standing before Pontius Pilate. The Jewish trial is what we talked about 2 weeks ago. And when we looked at that, we heard the time frame of early in the morning. That's when it all started. Early in the morning. Was this legal? No. And Jesus stood before Annas. Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't mention him appearing before Annas. It's only in the Gospel of John. Who is the official high priest, though? The one that is recognized by Rome? Caiaphas. And that's phase 2. But John tells us they took him to who was religiously supposed to be the high priest. Now, were Annas and Caiaphas, were either of them good guys? They're part of the aristocracy, members of the Sadducean sect. We're familiar with the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They were competing with each other. But the religious leaders including the Sadducees and Pharisees, chief priests, all those folks have teamed up to kill Jesus. And it's in the middle of the night when Jesus stands before Caiaphas, and then to make it legal, they've already accused Jesus and declared him guilty. He stands before the Sanhedrin Council early in the morning. Jesus' crucifixion will be later that morning. Around 9 in the morning is when things really get started for him. So they've got to hurry. When Jesus was standing before the Sanhedrin Council, things were not going well. And Caiaphas took control of things and said, all right, forget all these false witnesses that are contradicting each other. Tell us plainly, are you the Christ? And what did Jesus finally say? As you say, and you will see the Son of Man riding on the clouds. Referencing Daniel 7, verses 13 and 14. Jesus is God. He was claiming to be God. And what was the accusation levied against Jesus at that point? He's blaspheming. Was Jesus blaspheming? No, he is the Son of God. Here was Jesus, our high priest. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in the sermon this morning. He is our high priest standing before this human proclaiming to be the high priest who is evil and horrible. Complete injustice done to Jesus, and yet Jesus is our perfect high priest. When they go before Rome, so now they're going to take Jesus before Rome, what is the accusation? He has been blaspheming, claiming to be God. No, they change the accusation. And what does it become when he's standing before the Roman prefect? He's claiming to be a king. Now, is that true? Is Jesus claiming to be the Son of God? Yes. Is he claiming to be a king? Yes. As a matter of fact, he is. But is his kingdom of this world? All right. This is a loaded question. Is Jesus a threat to Rome? Yes and no. Militarily, no. And yet, when we practice Christianity, do we have slaves? Do we live immoral, decadent lives? So in a way, Jesus is a threat. He's a threat to American society. He's a threat in every generation. But as far as wanting to replace Caesar, that's not what Jesus came to do. That is not what he claimed to be. I preached a sermon a while back on Jesus as our president. Wouldn't he make a great president? Well, of course. But after his 8 years are up, then what? Jesus didn't come to establish an earthly kingdom. Just like there were 3 phases in the Jewish trial, Annas, Caiaphas, the Sanhedrin Council, there are 3 phases of the Roman trial. The first one is before Pontius Pilate. The second one is before Herod Antipas, and we'll talk about that in a moment. What does Jesus say in front of Herod Antipas? What does he say to him? Nothing. As a lamb is silent before its shears, so he opened not his mouth. What was Herod Antipas hoping Jesus would do? Perform a miracle. I mean, I've heard about this guy. And we'll talk about that a little bit in just a moment. But then Herod sends Jesus back to Pilate. Now, no single gospel says there were 3 phases of the Jewish trial. There were 3 phases of the Roman trial. But when you put them all together, this is what we see, and this is a good way to understand what's going on here. What's going on here with Jesus. And I hope that will help us as we go through our material. Who was Pilate? What was his role? Was he a Jew? No, he's a Roman governor. The technical term is prefect, and we have historical evidence that he ruled. This is what happened. You had Herod the Great, who was appointed by Rome before Jesus was even born, and he's ruling. He was half Jew, half Edomite, or Idumean in New Testament times, and he was hated by the Jews. Not to go into a full biography of Herod the Great, but he ruled with an iron fist, And his job was to control this region of Palestine for the Romans. And he did. But when he died, his kingdom was divided up among his sons. Herod Philip in the northeast area, where Caesarea Philippi is. So you've got Philip giving honor to Caesar and calling his city Caesarea Philippi after himself. That's up in the northeast region. You also had Herod Antipas. And when you're reading in the New Testament, most of the time it's going to be Herod Antipas. It just says Herod, but that's the son of Herod the Great. There are actually, I think, 5 Herods mentioned in the New Testament. But the other Herod was Archelaus. Archelaus ruled Judea. So Herod's kingdom was divided up, still under Roman rule, but Archelaus could not control it. He just messed up royally, and he was deposed. That's when Rome said, all right, we're going to bring in to this difficult place, we're going to bring in our own prefects, governors is more conventionally how we call them. And they had to keep the peace. When people start chanting about this blasphemer, it's the Passover, you've got tens of thousands of extra Jews living in Jerusalem during the feast that's about to start, the day of Passover and then the 7-day Feast of Unleavened Bread. That's a powder keg. People were talking about the Messiah, and you remember on Sunday, Jesus had made his triumphal entry. There's a lot of talk, there's a lot of excitement here. How does that make Pilate feel? Uneasy, to say the least. What did you say? Anxious. He's really worried here. And so he's got to thread a line. Here's the problem, though. As he listens to people talk about Jesus, it's pretty obvious to him Jesus is innocent. And we'll see that this morning as well. We're not going to be able to look at all of the material about Pilate, but here is a historical marker from Caesarea. Was it Caesarea? I can't remember. Can you look up there and kind of make out? I'll see if I can get this. Pontius, there's the U, which looks like a V, V-S, Pilatus. And here is an artist's rendering of what it would have looked like, but that's how it is today. This is a historical marker. You read your New Testament, you see Pontius Pilate being mentioned. Well, there he is. And he ruled from AD 26 to AD 36. This is the time. I believe this is AD 30. Some scholars will say, well, it's AD 33, but it's because of when the Passover would have fallen that year. And I understand it's on a Friday. What I'd like to do, we did this before, is just read these passages together and get a flavor of what's going on by just reading the 4 Gospels. They're repeating the same events, but this is phase 1. This is Jesus being brought by the Jewish people, the religious leaders. They are taking him to Pilate. Let's just read these verses. Matthew 27, verse 2. I might as well read verse 1. When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. That's phase 3 of the Jewish trial, the Sanhedrin Council. They bound him and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate, the governor. Drop down to verse 11. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, this is Pilate, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You have said so." And when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, i.e. Annas, Caiaphas, the Sanhedrin high priestly class, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" And he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. What is this fulfilling? What prophecy, famous prophecy, is this fulfilling? Isaiah 53. As a lamb is silent before its shearer, so he opened not his mouth. That doesn't mean Jesus never said anything, ever. But when he was given an opportunity to defend himself, he didn't. He just absolutely did not. All right, I'm going to read Mark 15. Same account, just it's going to give us a little different information. Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered him, "You have said so." And the chief priests accused him of many things. So what's going on here? Pilate's in the praetorium, and the chief priests and them are leveling accusations against Jesus. That's a little more information than we had a moment ago. And you see again Pilate saying, "You're not going to defend yourself at all?" Nope. Doesn't say a word. Luke's account, Luke 23. Then the whole company, this is the Sanhedrin Council, the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate. That's the end of the Jewish trial. Here's the beginning of phase 1 of the Roman trial. They began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man claiming to be God and blaspheming." That's not what it says. "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he is a Christ, a king." What happened to the charge of blasphemy? That doesn't mean anything to Pilate. What would Pilate likely have done if they had said, "He's claiming to be the Messiah, he's claiming to be God"? What would Pilate have probably done? Said, "That's your concern. You deal with that." And we see Paul having to interact with the Romans in that way, the people who accused Paul. So, yeah, I think that's exactly what would have happened. Well, what is Pilate able to just simply dismiss this charge of somebody claiming to be a rival to Caesar? Is that okay? You think they might send that up the chain if he ignores it? Well, Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he said, "You have said so." So here Jesus does respond. Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no guilt in this man." Well, how does that make Annas and Caiaphas feel? Oh, no! Urgh. Pilate, you don't understand. You've got to crucify this guy. He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place. So they mention Galilee. And we'll need to remember that. Remember Galilee. Let's go over to John's account. Let's read. And John has a lot more information about Jesus' interaction with Pilate. And we're not going to read it all, but we're going to interrupt here. And John 18, beginning of verse 28. Just get it in our head here. Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They themselves, listen to this, they themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters, his praetorium, so that they might not be defiled, so that they could eat the Passover. Oh, these guys are so holy. So Pilate went out to them and said, "All right, tell me, what accusation do you bring against this man?" Isn't it neat how each gospel has a little bit of information and it fills in the scene? They answered him, "Well, if this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." The Jews said, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken, to show by what kind of death he was going to die, which he had been talking about all throughout the Gospels. He's going to go to Jerusalem, he's going to die, and then be raised. Verse 33. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, so this is a private conversation between Pilate and Jesus. He asks him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world. Then Pilate said to him, Are you a king then? Jesus answered, You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Pilate said to him, What is truth? And the irony there, of course, is he is looking at the epitome of truth, Jesus in the flesh. And Pilate doesn't see it. He doesn't understand it. Does Pilate understand anything Jesus is saying here? What is Jesus saying? What is he saying about his kingdom? Okay, so Pilate's not trusting anyone. He's trying to get to the truth. And what he really doesn't trust is the accusations. He knows Jesus is a good person. He knows Jesus has not done anything worthy of crucifixion. But that's what they're begging for. That's what they want. That's what they're trying to get to. All right, well, let's go on to phase 2. And for that, we need to go back to Luke. Luke 23, verse 5, has the religious leaders interacting with Pilate outside the praetorium. He has to go back and forth, back and forth. And it says in verse 5, he says, now you don't understand. You need to punish this guy. He's been stirring up the people. He's been going all throughout Judea, which is the region that Pilate rules, from Galilee even to this place. It's just, this guy, his influence is everywhere, including Galilee. And Pilate goes, Galilee. I'm going to send him to Herod and let him deal with this mess. So what is Herod trying to do at this point? Pass the buck. Pilate did not want a phase 3. He wanted a phase 1, okay, go away. A phase 2, and that's it. It's out of my hands. I'm done. Let's see what happens. Here is phase 2, Herod Antipas. When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. Is Jesus a Galilean? I mean, he was born in Bethlehem of Judea, but he grew up a Galilean. Jesus of Nazareth of Galilee. So he's excited. He sends Jesus to Herod Antipas. Would not be a very far journey. We'll look at a map here. In fact, let me see if I can bring that up. Yeah, here we are. Here is a nice drawing. This is from AD 63. Not exactly from AD 30, but you get the idea. You can see the temple here, the grounds that Herod the Great made, and so you've got all these homes, these rich, beautiful homes right there. That's where a lot of this is taking place. So the praetorium, the governor's palace, is where Jesus actually is. And what he's going to do is send him to Herod, which isn't very far away, Herod's fortress, and try to pass Jesus off there. And so they lead him, let me look at that. So you've got the palace of Herod the Great. So this is where Herod Antipas is going to be. Just a short journey, just a short little trip, and they take Jesus there. It is now early Friday morning. Let's see what happens. Verse 6, Luke 23, verse 6. When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. Would Herod Antipas normally be in Jerusalem? No, he'd be in his region of Galilee. He also ruled some other places near the Dead Sea. That's where he had John the Baptist put. And so you got his region here, you got Judea to the south, and then you got some other regions that he ruled. There's a map in the book that shows that, where he ruled. Why is he in Jerusalem then? It's the Passover. That's why he's there, and Pilate is excited. He says, all right, this is great. Verse 8, when Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad. He's excited. for he had long desired to see him because he had heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. In fact, when Jesus started getting hot and heavy in his Galilean ministry, and that's where Herod Antipas was mainly, and he started hearing about the miraculous activity, who did he think Jesus was? Do you remember? He thought Jesus was John the Baptist. But wait a minute, John the Baptist had been beheaded. So he thought Jesus was John the Baptist back from the dead, and that's why he was able to perform miracles. I don't think Herod Antipas got much sleep after he killed John the Baptist. I think he was haunted by John the Baptist. So here he is now saying, all right, I'm going to meet Jesus. He questioned him at some length, verse 9, but he made no answer. Jesus didn't say a word in front of Herod Antipas. The chief priests and the scribes stood up, vehemently accusing him. And Herod, with his soldiers, treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then, arraying him in splendid clothing to mock him further, he sent him back to Pilate. And then we got this comment that Herod Antipas and Pontius Pilate became friends from that day on. They had been at enmity with each other. Well, I guess something good came out of the meeting. Oh boy. And they send him back. And now we're going to have the third phase when he goes back to Pilate. Oh boy, here he comes again. I thought I got rid of this guy. Pilate then called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people and said to them, you brought me this man as one who was misleading the people. And after examining him before you, John's account, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish him and release him. The punishment that is going to be exacted on Jesus is a scourging. And what Pilate is hoping is that the scourging will be enough to satisfy the mob at this point, the Jewish crowd that is demanding for Jesus' death. Does it satisfy the Jewish crowd? No, it does not. He was hoping that it would because, again, what is Pilate's motivation? What is he trying to do? Yeah, keep peace. This is not working out so well. Here's something really interesting. We're not going to go and read all these verses. We just read in Luke's account where Pilate says, I find no guilt in him. That phrase occurs 3 times in John's account. John 18, verse 38, we already read that. John 19, verse 4, I'm bringing him out to you. I'm bringing the man out to you so that you may know I find no guilt in him. He brings Jesus out and he says, behold the man. John 19, verse 6, Pilate said to them, take him yourselves and crucify him. I'm not crucifying him, for I find no guilt in him. And then at that point, what? What happens? The crowds just keep yelling, what? Let him be crucified. Let him be crucified. I find no guilt in him. And then they say something. They say, his blood be on us. John 19, verses 1 through 7. When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, crucify him! Crucify him! Pilate said to them, take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no guilt in him. The Jews answered, we have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself out to be the Son of God. Well, that didn't satisfy them. So he took Jesus and flogged him. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and arrayed him in a purple robe. They came up to him saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And struck him with their hands. We will look at the scourging next week as we talk about Jesus' crucifixion, his actual crucifixion. So this morning we're just focusing on Pilate's part. Now Pilate tried to release Jesus. And he said, all right, crowds. I know you're upset. I know you're really upset here. But It was tradition on the Passover for a prisoner to be released. That was a good faith effort by the Roman Empire. It became a tradition. And Pilate says, here is this perfect person to release, Jesus. I'll scourge him, flog him, but then I'm going to release him. And the crowd said no. Who do they want released instead? Barabbas. Barabbas. Was Barabbas guilty of anything? Oh, yeah. His name means son of the Father, and he is described by John as a robber. Matthew's account says this Barabbas that was released in place of Jesus was a notorious prisoner. And then Luke's account, Luke and Mark both say he was an insurrectionist and a murderer. What is an insurrectionist in this context here? What is he trying to do as an insurrectionist? Overthrow Rome. Who is the person who should have been crucified? It should have been Barabbas. You know who else should have been crucified? Us. Jesus is doing all of this for us. We are the ones who are guilty of the sin he came to eradicate. All right. Who killed Jesus? As you read the New Testament and you see the disciples of Jesus preaching, here's Peter. Who does he place the blame on? The Romans? He blames the Jews. You crucified him by the hands of the Romans, is what it'll tell them. So it's not the Romans who are accused. Here's Peter again in Acts 3. You delivered over and denied in the presence of Pilate when he decided to release him. But you denied the holy and righteous one, talking about Jesus, and asked for a murderer to be granted to you. Who was that? Who was the murderer? That was Barabbas. And you killed the author of life, whom God raised from the dead. And we'll get to all that in a few weeks. Acts 4. So we looked at Acts 2, Acts 3. Acts 4, here is Peter now standing before the Sanhedrin Council. Truly in this city there were gathered together against your holy servant Jesus. This is where they're praying. They're praying after being released by the Sanhedrin. Whom you appointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the peoples of Israel. So there's a little more blame shared here, but Jesus, we are being told, was killed by the Jews. Here's one more. This is Paul preaching to Gentiles. And let's see what he says. Is he going to blame Gentiles? For those who live in Jerusalem and their rulers, they did not recognize Jesus, nor understand the utterances of the prophets, which are read every Sabbath, fulfilled by condemning him. What he's saying is, they fulfilled Old Testament scripture by killing Jesus. Jesus knew this was going to happen. God knew this was going to happen. And who is Paul blaming? Jews. Let me look this up and make sure. No, he is in Antioch of Pisidia. There are Jews in this audience. In Acts 14, he'll be in Lystra and will be before Gentiles. So here he's still talking to Jews. 1 Timothy 6, much later, he makes this comment. I charge you in the presence of God, who gives life to all things, and of Christ Jesus, who in his testimony before Pilate made the good confession. So just all throughout the New Testament, you have references to Jesus being tried before Pontius Pilate. That's what I wanted to point out here. By the way, there's something really interesting that happens when Jesus stands before Pilate. He gets a text message. Pilate gets a text from somebody. Who? His wife. And what did his wife tell him in the message she sent to him? I have had a dream. And I'm telling you, honey, have nothing to do with this just man. This is wrong. Now, does she believe God in heaven, the one true God, has sent her a message? Who does she believe has sent her a message? Zeus, Apollo, somebody has sent her a message. But who actually sent her that dream? God. What I want to ask you, as we think about all this, which side would we have been on? Would we have been among those Jews who on Sunday said, Hosanna to the Son of David, and then by Friday be saying, let him be crucified? Now I know my answer. My answer is no, I would have stood up for Jesus. That's what Peter said too. That's what all the apostles said. And what happened to Peter? He denied Jesus that night 3 times. When Peter was warming his hands at the fire and being accused by servant girls, he was terrified. Later in his life, he wrote these words. 1 Peter 3, verse 15. Sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, and always be ready to give an answer for the hope that is within you, with meekness and fear. When Peter was alone, scared to death, he gave all the wrong answers. What was his response to that? How did Peter act after he realized what he had done? Yeah, he was ashamed, and he went and wept bitterly. And Jesus forgave him. What do you think when Peter was again alone and being accused of being a disciple of Jesus? What do you think he said then? All the right things. You ever get down on yourself because you don't stand up for the Lord when you had an opportunity? Or you just completely fall headlong into your friend's way of living and talking, and later you regret that? You know what that is? That's normal. We all like to be liked. We all like for people to say, hey, Marc's great and he's one of us. But can we live like the world? Can we talk like the world? Can we act just like the world? Okay. If you claim to be a disciple of Jesus, what does that mean? You're totally committed. What we're trying to do is live like Jesus. So when somebody does something horrible and awful to you, how do you respond to them? What did Jesus tell us we should do when we are wronged? Turn the other cheek? Forgive them? What if they don't ask for our forgiveness? What if we still have to forgive them anyway? Did Jesus practice what he preached when he was accused? When Jesus was raised from the dead, I know this, we know the story, of course, but when Jesus was raised from the dead, did he go back to Pilate? Did he go back to Pilate and say, nanny, nanny, boo, boo, I'm alive? Why not? That would have been so cool. Maybe he could have converted Pontius Pilate by being raised from the dead. Yes, ma'am. I love that. Christ died for Pilate. Jesus did not come here to play games with people. He came to die on the cross. And that's exactly what he did. We are living our lives to imitate him, to be just like Jesus. Yes, ma'am. Okay. And we're going to look at the crucifixion next week, so that's why I'm not going into a lot of detail about that yet. Yes, sir. A mob mentality. Right. That's right. Matthew 27. Right. Yeah. When the movie Mel Gibson made all those years ago now came out, I saw it one time in the theater that morning, and that's the only time I've seen it. The book's better, by the way, than the movie. And I remember how they were presenting it in Aramaic, where people are talking to each other and they're giving subtitles. And when Pilate said, "You take him yourselves," I mean, you crucify him, and then they respond by saying, "Let him be crucified, let him be crucified." And then when they say, "His blood be on us and our children," there were no closed captioning. But that's the place where they would have said it. And of course, that's Mel Gibson and trying to respond to anti-Semitism and head it off. So maybe people wouldn't realize what the story actually said there. But who do the apostles of Jesus, who do they accuse of killing Jesus? Well, the Jews. Is that anti-Semitic? No, because that could have easily been us. Yeah, Paul and Peter were Jews. Right. Okay. Are we any less guilty than those Jews who yelled, "Let him be crucified"? No. We're not going to sing this song. I've just got the words here. I was not in the garden when he knelt to God and prayed. I did not kiss him on the cheek like Judas did when Jesus was betrayed. I was not at the trial when the crowd jeered at his name. I did not make him bear a cross or walk a road of shame. But how does the song keep going? But every time I sin on earth, I feel like I'm the one who shouted, "Crucify." I'm the one. What was that? That made his cross so high. I'm the one who stood and watched him die. What have I done? I'm the one. Now, today is the day our world turns to Jesus and honors the crucifixion. It's springtime. And what's going to happen? The end of the story is not Jesus lived and died, but that he rose from the dead. We're not going to go into all the ins and outs of the Easter holiday. And this is coincidence that we're studying this. This wasn't planned per se. But it is something for us to think about and to remember. Because this is a major part of our faith. That Jesus was born of a virgin. He died on the cross of Calvary for the sins of humanity. What we have focused on for nearly 11 months now is the teachings of Jesus. And that's just as important, if not more important. It doesn't mean anything unless Jesus dies on the cross and is raised from the dead. But his teachings are what we have focused on throughout this study. His miracles, his claims. And as we read about these bad people who hated Jesus, we need to remember, I'm the one who he died for. I'm the one that should be so thankful and living every day. The mob mentality that got people caught up yelling, "Let him be crucified." The very people who had said, "Oh, we love Jesus, Hosanna to the Son of David." Is there a mob mentality in 21st century America right now? Yeah, you don't see people gathered together in one place like you did there, tens of thousands of people. But we have social networking, which I despise. Which is such a useful tool, but can also be abused. I look every day at the news, I don't watch the TV. I look at the news and I see all the horrible, awful stuff going on, and I wish I would just stop looking at it because it's all, well, except for a good story here or there. What is going on in our world today? What is the mob mentality? Hold that thought. Yes, ma'am.
We need to read
Okay. Okay. And that is a very good point. Okay. And I guess part of my problem is I'm not anti-Semitic. You know, I love everybody. That's what we're supposed to do. But there are people who, in the name of religion, have killed millions of Jews. Not just on this side of the cross, but even before. And they have been persecuted. What is the point of the apostles' teaching? You killed him. It's exactly what Joe Lynn said. To help these people repent. In fact, Paul was shocked that his fellow countrymen did not respond to Jesus. Did I misrepresent what you were saying? Was there something else? Okay. It's palatable enough. What's the mob saying right now that we need to stand up for? Sin. I mean, that's ultimately what it gets down to. Be more specific, though. What's going on in our world right now that is making your head spin? Confusing male and female. Who made male and female? Well, God. And where was that established? On the Mount Sinai? In the beginning, Genesis 1. Male and female created he them. This is just part of who we are. And that is being blurred. Do you ever feel like the prisoners are running the asylum? What is our role? What does Jesus want us to do? Does he want us to go, it's awful. Boy, it's terrible. That's one thing. Yes, we need to do that. But what's the next step? Show the way. Show them. Yeah, be the light. Be the little Christian light. Any last thoughts? Any last comments? Pilate was between a rock and a hard place. Did he do what he should have done? He failed. He let the mob crowd take over. Okay. Let's learn from Pilate and realize, just like all people, we want to be liked. We want to keep the peace. But Jesus did say, I came not to bring peace, but a sword. We need to appreciate the context. But Jesus did not come here so everybody would like us. He came so that we could all be like him. Thank you for studying this. I'm looking forward to studying the crucifixion of Jesus with you next week.